Hi, I'm Alice. For anyone who doesn't know me, I'm the community manager at Frolo. We're just waiting for Uju to join the call, but we've got Orla in the meantime. Um, you might have met Orla or seen her takeover on Frolo that she's done before. She's a Northern Irish Frolo, an activist. She co-founded Still I Rise Storytelling, which is a storytelling platform which is all about celebrating diversity and tolerance and acceptance through books. She's also the host of the Deep Shit podcast, which is all about tackling stigma, and has given a TED talk on that subject too. So now I'll hand over to Orla so she can say hello.
What an intro, oh my goodness. Thank you so much for having me here today. The Frolo Community app really was a lifesaver for me in terms of finding my community. None of my close friendship group were single parents, so it was really finding my feet in terms of support and socially as well. I am based in Northern Ireland, in Belfast, and at the minute, mid-lockdown, I have closed my coffee shop and I have set up a digital media solutions business, and I have really grown my Still I Rise diversity storytelling, which we do for kids. Should I just do my full 10 minutes now?
Yeah, I think Uju's just joined the call.
Amazing.
Hello.
Hi, Uju.
I think what I'll do is I'll quickly just introduce Uju for any Frolos who aren't familiar with her work, and then then we can hand back over to you, Orla, and you can talk a bit about your experience, and then we'll go back to Uju, and then we can open up for some questions. So hi Uju, thank you so much for joining us. Uju, for those of you who don't know, is a screenwriter, a blogger. Her blog, Babes About Town, is great. It's like a one-stop shop for all sorts of cool things to do with kids, like in and around London. She's also written a book which is called Bringing Up Race: How to Raise a Kind Child in a Prejudiced World, and that's coming out in early September, the 3rd of September, I think. And that's all about her experience raising a Black multicultural family in the UK, predominantly white country, and it has lots of helpful tips, backed by research on how we can all have more open conversations about race and just, improve the way that we kind of connect as human beings and have these kind of important conversations. So thank you so much for joining us. Now we'll hand back over to Orla so she can talk a bit about her experience, and then we'll come back to you.
Thank you so much, Alice. So my name is Orla McKeating. Like I said, I am 38 and I live in Belfast. I am a single mother to my son Elliot, who is 7, and he is biracial. He's half Congolese Belgian and half Irish, Northern Irish. So I grew up in Belfast. I am one of 7 children. And I finished my degree here and moved over to Belgium for 3 months, where I stayed for 10 years, which was amazing. I worked in fashion, worked a lot in Paris and Amsterdam, and basically lived my best life. And then I fell pregnant. I was in a relationship for 4 years, fell pregnant. The relationship kind of disintegrated, and I moved home 7 months pregnant, back in with mum and dad, had just turned 30, and I felt like my life had literally imploded. So I spent a lot of my maternity leave just being really ashamed, felt like a failure, just felt like I'd no career, no identity, had the baby, and that was fine. I never really thought that race was an issue at all. I was more consumed with my own ego, basically looking back, and how I'd maybe let my family down or let my friends down, and just felt massively isolated. So I had, kind of spent the maternity leave just feeling really lonely, and just kind of walked about Belfast. It was winter, your baby cries so much and you're not used to it, and none of my friends had had babies. This story gets better, it's not depressing the whole way through. But then I couldn't find a place where I felt, I suppose, accepted or safe or wanted. So every time I went into a coffee shop or anywhere, he just right. So I just walked out again and was miserable. So I decided to open my own coffee shop with that in mind. So create a really community focus where everyone was welcome, where you could come in with your baby, breastfeed, where you could meet your mates. It was open in the evening for anything at all. And we built and grew the business, and we started a roastery as well in 2015. Then about 5 years in, I was literally at the cusp of a breakdown and just couldn't do it anymore. I feel like I had not dealt with stuff I should have dealt with beforehand, and just everything kind of fell apart. So I took what I had hoped would be 2 weeks off work, and it ended up 6 months. And I really took that time to, I suppose, unpack. I did therapy. I dealt with things that had happened in the relationship with his father and how I was basically finding me again. So then I found whenever I got back to work, my life just took a different direction. I was more focused in equality. I started my podcast on basically raising awareness on issues typically attached to stigma. And then everything was great. Moved out of mum and dad's. Elliot started school. And then he came home one day and told me that someone had told him that they didn't want to play with him because they only played with white people. So we live in Northern Ireland. I don't know if there's any Northern Irish Frolos here, but we live in a really predominantly white society. So it's getting better, but it's not enough. So at this point, whenever he came home and did this, I just literally did not know what to do, who to talk to, or his father and I had broken up. He's still not in touch at the minute. So I contacted the school, chased up the school. There was these things still happening in the playground. Things like, I don't play with people with brown skin, the same one person. So I finally got to the headmistress's office, and she told me I was making it up. Told me he was making it up. He must have heard the racist language at home. There was no way this would happen in our school. It's so diverse, and basically turned it around. And at that point, after having lived, I suppose, such a white privileged life of always having a safety net, always never really having to fight for anything, I just found myself in a place of, right, where do I go to? Who do I reach out to? And it was at that moment where I just knew I had to get to work, and it was my own responsibility to do it. And that opened my eyes to so much that I never knew before. And how would I have known it before, just living in the circles that I had of. So I reached out to the African and Caribbean community here in Northern Ireland. I arranged play dates with people that looked like Elliot. I remember actually, I talked about this in my TED Talk. Our doorbell rang one day, and there was a biracial child and his black father standing at the door, and the dad was like, oh my God, we live opposite you, and this is my son, and they look the same. And then Elliot, they got on amazing, like 6-year-old boys just having the crack. And then Elliot drew a picture the next day, and it was just like happy and sun and hearts and these 2 kids with these amazing afros. And it just was like, it's those little things. He doesn't see people that look like him. I started to really go to town on getting books of representation, on reading about Black heroes, past and present, game changers. Kind of started going to events here in Northern Ireland. Had to really seek them out, but they're there. And just kind of tried to, I suppose, build his confidence and kind of incorporate that side of him, which is so beautiful and so important to his own identity and emotional well-being. So it was that kind of self-education and gradually building a tribe in that. Never got anywhere with the school. I mean, I joined the PTA, kind of falls on deaf ears, only that he is so happy in that place. It hasn't happened again. I've kept him there, kind of a struggle, because what do you do as a parent, you know? So I suppose I'm moving forward like that. I did a TED Talk last year in the Northern Ireland Parliament, and it was all about the stigma of single parenting in Northern Ireland and race issues. And the stats, I'm going to just share some stats with you, which I thought were quite shocking, but in the context of my story here, it's quite important. So in the Northern Ireland Life and Time Survey, which was the last one done between 2016 and 2017, there were more race-related crimes than sectarian crimes in Northern Ireland. So if you know our history, that is massive, because we have a massive sectarian problem here. 25% of people would not willingly accept someone from an ethnic minority background as their work colleague, and 47% of people believe there's more prejudice in Northern Ireland than 5 years previous. Those stats alone are so alarming. There are more recent ones in terms of the Black Lives Matter rally that we had, which was so peaceful, socially distanced. Police jeeps showed up in riot gear and spoke over the speakers. They fined mostly Black teenagers for, I mean, it's an ongoing case. It's quite interesting and very depressing to read. So I suppose for me, it's a marathon, not a sprint. So it's incorporating practices every single day. I started my Still Arise Diversity Storytelling for Kids last year, which was great. We met once a week and we talk about race issues, different family structures, emotional well-being, disabilities, saving the planet, and there's something else. I can never remember the sixth one, which is awful, but and since lockdown, we've started to do 2 free sessions every week in Zoom, and it's kind of got massive, it's massively growing. And we are in the middle of developing an anti-racism for kids session with the support of educational psychologists and teachers, just to kind of start the conversations and incorporate practices and read those books that are important to our children. And I suppose just really encouraging that in our next generation. So I'm happy to be here as a white parent. I will never speak for Black people or Black experience. I'm speaking from my experience as a white parent to a biracial child. So I am learning every single day. I really can't wait to hear Uju's story and all about her work, because I'm a massive fan as well. And Alice had passed on the questions from yesterday and the last couple of days, and they're so brilliant, and I'm really looking forward to learn from all of you as well. So thank you so much for listening.
Thank you so much, Orla. Yeah, and I think that leads really nicely into Uju's kind of, you know, we'd love to hear a bit more from you about your experience, especially of writing your book, which is, you know, so timely at the moment, and yes, is coming out soon. So take it away.
Yeah, so excuse my background. That's why it took me a while to get on, because I'm like, I don't know what's happening. Oh, it stopped. That weird flashing lighting thing. Anyway, hi. Yeah, so I am, as you said, a mother of 2 Black boys in Britain, which comes with many, many sort of different challenges and considerations. And one of the reasons I wanted to write this book is because I thought there needed to be a voice that was kind of mother to mother, as opposed to, you know, I'm not a race academic, I'm not a parenting expert, I'm a mum, and, you know, these are our experiences. So I'm sharing my story, I'm sharing stories from other parents. I interviewed a wide range of mums of different backgrounds and ethnicities, and obviously then I did a lot of research into what it's like raising children in this day and age, what I would call the sort of Brexit and Trump era, where I think racism, it's much more tangible on some levels, because, you know, I think with Brexit, there came a lot of noise about outsiders and foreigners and immigrants and all of that stoked up. And at the same time, it's still very under the surface, at least in England. You know, England is very much sort of light society kind of racism, but then you deal with a lot of microaggressions as well, and things that happen, you know, under the surface that nobody can really talk about, but is there. So yeah, part of my thing of writing the book was just to talk about how do we start a conversation, not just as a Black mum with my kids, but obviously as a white mum with white children, or you know, a mother raising children of different heritage, you know, how do you even begin to bring this up, you know, and when is the right time to start having this conversation as well? So, oh, sorry, I just saw something pop up. Yeah, so that's basically the focus of my book. And I really wanted to keep the focus on kindness. And it's interesting because I've heard sort of in some circles people say, oh, kindness is not the same as anti-racist. And that is true on one level, but I think that, you know, people also mistake kindness for kind of like passive, you know, I'm just very nice and I'm not doing anything. And I think of kindness as an active thing, like being kind, like going out of your way to do the right thing and to stand up for people and to call people out when necessary. So I wanted that to be the focus because I feel like that's something that at least draws everybody in, no matter what you're thinking, no matter what stage you're at in your sort of journey towards being an anti-racist, or even acknowledging that you might have internalized racism. I think if you know, if you're raising a child, hopefully you want to raise a kind child. So, you know, we start from there.
Was just muted there. Yeah, thank you for sharing that. I think that kind of distinction between kindness and I think like passive or just kind of not the idea of niceness. I think they're two distinct things, and I think it's really interesting. People would definitely want to raise their children to be kind. So thank you for kind of sharing a bit more about the kind of the motivations behind writing the book and the process of writing it. Does anyone on the call have any questions, first of all? If you want to you can just type them in the chat section if that's easier. If you're still kind of thinking, we've got some questions that have come in advance that we can dive into.
Could I maybe ask you just something?
Go for it.
I would be really keen to know more about our own implicit bias, and I suppose not only unpacking that, but how we can move forward with our own children in terms of being aware of it, and in terms of raising them maybe to be aware of their own implicit bias and how we move forward with that.
Yeah, it's a really good question. And I think the first thing is really just acknowledging it. You know, it's implicit because most of us haven't acknowledged that we have any kind of biases. And I think there's a test you can even do online from Harvard, and you can do that test. So pretty much absolutely everybody is going to fail that test in one way or another, because we all have been conditioned by society and also by our own innate fear of strangers. You know, there's a sort of slight fear of strangers. And what interested me when I was researching the book was finding out how early that babies, literally 3 months old, can tell the difference between people of different ethnicity, which was not really a surprise to me, because I thought I've always felt something like that, but you know, it was interesting to see that there've been studies done on it. But the point is that they don't actually attach any judgment to it. You know, from the studies, a baby who's 3 months old will just observe that you look different from their primary caregiver. And it's only like when they get to, I think, around 9 months, that sort of stranger danger, you know, when babies have that transition from just thinking they're just babies to suddenly thinking, oh no, this is a stranger. It's around that time where they, you know, that sort of slight anxiety around difference kicks in. And so that's why I say, well, you've got to intervene really early on, but also acknowledge that this is just kind of, in a way, a primal response. And what you can do is just be very intentional about interrupting it however you can. One way is exactly as you've been doing, Orla, which is like, you know, surrounding yourself with more people who look like your child, or if your child is in like a homogenous environment with people who look nothing like your child, you know, going out of your way to spend more time in different environments, to bring more of these sort of diverse books and inclusive books into your home and into your surroundings. and not being afraid to just talk about, I think, times when you make mistakes as well, or times when you have a strange reaction. Don't be afraid to admit it. People are very scared of, no one wants to be called a racist, and people are very scared of being a bigot or whatever. But it's like, most of this is not our fault. We've been conditioned into this by centuries and centuries and centuries. So it's really like, okay, let's just unlearn all the things that we've learned and let's do better, and every day is like an opportunity to do that.
Thank you.
Any other questions from anyone on the call at the moment? Okay, well, we can get started with some questions from previously. Oh, we have just had a question. So this is from Rachel, and she says that she's a white mum to a biracial daughter who is currently only 3. I'm not sure race and racism is likely to be something her dad brings up to her. So looking at how I can best be there for my daughter for anything related to race issues when I might not fully understand the situation, considering my own white privilege. From experience, so she would like to know, from experience, when is she first likely to be aware of race, and should I discuss anything before she brings it up? I want to make sure she feels she can talk to me. She has friends of different races and sees both biracial and Black people in her day-to-day life.
Yeah, so I mean, absolutely. Like I've mentioned, she's aware. She's been aware since she was a baby. Actually, she's been noticing it. And what happens with kids is that they don't have the language for it. Number one, because it's just not spoken about, in polite company, half the time. And also, then they feel there's a tension, around race issues half the time. Sometimes because we feel tense, it's like race comes up and it's like, ooh, don't mention it, or they ask a question and you shush them. So I think, she is aware. So, and I think the best thing really is to be proactive. Very often parents enter this conversation because your child has asked you something really awkward or something weird in public, and you're like, oh God, don't say that. And then you panic and, have this sort of reactive response. And I think actually, you take the initiative, you bring it up. And I say, people go, oh, how do I even bring it up? I'm like, well, any conversation, often starts just with a question. Like, here we are, and you're asking me questions, and then I respond. So you can ask her questions about, what she's noticed, how she feels about, does she have friends of different colors, what she feels about her skin tone, what she feels about your skin tone. You can talk about your differences in skin tone and hair. You can talk about, your different family lines, because obviously you have a mixed heritage. She's inheriting so much diversity and stuff that you can celebrate. It's like different cultural elements that are part of her experience. You can bring all of this in, and it doesn't have to be like one big, heavy conversation. It can just be, just bring it up as every now and then you talk about it. Obviously, there are books that you can use. The TV show, like half the time we wind up talking about race with our kids because we watch a lot of TV together, especially during lockdown. We've watched so much TV, and you just wind up, certain shows that you might not expect sometimes, bring up an opportunity, and then I'll ask them a question. What do you think about that? Or they'll ask a question, and then you lead from there. So I think it's be proactive, ask questions, listen to her questions. In terms of the thing about you, obviously you have different experiences. That's something you can talk about as well. You can say that I've had, things were different for me because, I'm white and I grew up differently, and things might be different for you, and you can bring it up. I don't know what the situation is with her dad, if he has any relationship with her or not. I couldn't quite tell from the question if he does or not. But you know, you can also reach out to her community. You know, if you're not close to her family members, there must be, you know, a Black community, you know, in the neighborhood, even online. Just reach out. Don't be afraid to reach out and say, I want to learn more, and I want more for my daughter as well.
Thank you, Uju. That was a great answer. And it was really interesting, actually, that really lines up. We had a child psychologist joined us a couple of weeks ago, and that was her main advice, or her main response to lots of questions, was just like, speak to your kids, ask them questions about what they think about things, rather than, you know, kind of worrying about it all to yourself and getting really stressed about it. Often if you just have a conversation with them about something and ask what they think, you get a much clearer understanding of how you can help them. Great. Okay, well, anyone else? Oh, another question. My son is 2 years old. Please, can you recommend any books that would help with diversity and culture? I haven't come across any very easily.
Oh gosh.
Yeah, go on.
All right, yeah, go ahead.
I recommended some in the previous chat there for older children. What I can do is share a list of the books that we use, because there are quite a lot available. Yeah. There's one that I can't remember the name, but I'm really happy to share that with Alice, and you can share it with the group. Yeah.
There are a lot. There's one called Jabari Jumps. I'm trying to think of the ones from I've got like resources which I've put into my book, and also I'm going to put some more up on my blog, because it does come up. And there's loads of reading lists that are going around online now as well. And there are some good websites like Knights of, that's like, you know, Knight in Shining Armor, Knights of, which is a good, they're a publisher and they publish inclusive, diverse books. There's Lee and Low as well. I think they're American, but you get a lot of book ideas off of that. So if you go to like a Black book publisher, multicultural book publisher for kids, very often you'll see just a range of choices. I like I Am Enough, which is, I think, by Grace Byers, which is aimed at a picture book. And then there's an old one called The Snowy Day by Ezra Jack Keys, which is something I write about in my book, which was kind of groundbreaking when it first, because, you know, I think it was like one of the first Black central heroes in a picture book back in like 1962. So, and it's really beautiful. It's like really nicely illustrated.
And interestingly, it was the most loaned children's book in the New York Library in 2019.
Oh, wow.
Is, and yeah, it's such a beautiful book.
It's gorgeous, yeah.
Yeah, a really good one, worth buying. And there's a lot of books about hair as well, which are really, really lovely. There's one called, I'm going to send a list anyway, but there's one called Daddy on Duty too, which is really nice. A nice book, really good representation as well in that, but I can send a feeder list for books.
Yeah, I think some Frolos have been sharing books that they like in the chat as well. So we'll put a list together after this and make sure it's available on the app for everyone to have a kind of good browse and look at all the different books that people have been reading with their kids, and also stuff that Uju and Orla recommend. Cool. So one of the questions that we had in advance was from an anonymous Frolo. She said that she wants to talk to her daughter about racism before she experiences it for herself. So she wants to have a kind of preemptive conversation before you know, any kind of unpleasant conversation, but she says that she doesn't want to pass on any of her own anxieties or make her daughter feel frightened or give her the idea that there's anything negative around being Black or that it's anything apart from beautiful. And yeah, she just wondered if you guys could share any advice about having that conversation in a kind of age appropriate but responsible way.
Yeah, I would say it's very difficult. I mean, it's emotional. You know, I've had to have that conversation with my boys when they were younger, and sometimes often it just pops up, you know, and you're not expecting it. So it's amazing that she's already thinking, you know, this far ahead, because many parents don't until, you know, their kids go to school and racism crops up. So I would say, you know, don't shy away from talking about racism when you talk about race, which is what a lot of parents want to do because you want to protect your child. But, you know, I think it's the same as, you know, your child is going to go out into the world, they're going to have to cross the road. Sometimes bad things happen if you cross the road, so you're going to have to be careful about crossing the road. So it's the same thing, like there are people out there who have the wrong view about people with different colored skin, or people with different type of hair, or people who speak a different language, you know. And, you know, I would just say there's a very people who don't have big hearts or big minds, but what she can do is be different. You know, I think it's one thing to sort of explain it to her, but at the same time try and empower her, you know, to so that she's not like a victim, but to think about what she can do to be different from that kind of person, to be the kind one, to be the person who stands up for others. And just to know that if anything like that happens to her, there's things that can be done. Like, she would never have to suffer it on her own. And, you know, you can watch a show, you know, there's films, there's TV shows, there's books that can sort of guide you through this conversation. And you can talk about historical figures. You know, obviously we always talk about Martin Luther King, but, you know, it's never too early to talk about that kind of figure, somebody who was able to bring people together and also to stand up against racism, you know, and tell her this is like it's a big fight that everybody can get together with. And, you know, hopefully she can be part of the fight for change, so she doesn't have to just be a victim. Yeah, and just always be very affirmative, you know, spending time telling your daughter how beautiful her skin is and how amazing her hair is, and how, you know, it's just an absolutely wonderful thing. And I don't think you can do enough of it. So I would just continue to do that as well, you know. So and I think when you're educating your child, like I said, don't drench them with information. Don't like be like, and this happened, and then the civil rights, and then this, and that, you know, like, don't, you know, freak them out completely. You can just, you know, give it to them in an age appropriate way as the time, and the context, you know, in the right context and time.
Yeah, I feel like from my experience, it's whenever I've been panicky or upset and taken an emotive approach, that's where I haven't been right. Like what you were saying, Uju, about like just, I suppose, like owning the moment and being honest about it. And I found as well, I mean, there's so many stories about bias and discrimination, but then there's race is also joy and community and family and resilience and allyship. And there's so much amazing things worth sharing that is so appropriate from any age. So I suppose it's maybe turning it a bit according to what your child needs at that point, and just kind of remembering, which I struggle with as well, just trying to remember that this is an amazingly beautiful gift to be able to have. Like my son's culture, it's amazing, and he's so lucky to have that, and it's just really reminding him of that every single day. So yeah, avoid anxiety like I did.
No, but even with the anxiety, I think also just give yourself, you know, be kind to yourself as well. It's not easy. You know, I'm here, I've written the book on talking to your kids about race, and I still sometimes my kids will say something and I'm like, like freeze, and I'm like, oh my God, you know, how do I respond to that? What do I say? And that's always just, you know, take a breath, just give yourself a little pause and then say, okay. And then you just tackle the question the best you know how. You're not going to get it right every time. You're not going to come out with some eloquent speech. You're not like some expert on this. You're learning as well. So I think being, like Orla said, being honest, being as open as you can, because the main thing is you want your child to trust you with how they're feeling and how you're feeling. You don't want there to be like this weird barrier in which, oops, I've said something unmentionable. Yeah.
I think as well, it's really nice whenever you have younger children to really consider a diverse school and really dig deep into, is it really diverse or is it just diverse to look at? What are they teaching the kids? What are they reading about? What are the after schools? What are their policies? Which is really important. Even like a meeting with head of, is it called pastoral care in England as well?
Yeah.
Head of pastoral care. Talking to them and just asking, have 3 questions on board and what's their reaction. It's so important. Having had Elliot in school for 4 years now, I kind of wish I had done that. So, yeah.
That's very important. And I'm hopeful that because of what's happening now globally, and more people are holding themselves to account and more schools will be holding themselves to account, because I feel like even trying to have those conversations would have been more of a challenge, that sort of feeling, like Orla said, oh, we're a very diverse school, and then shutting down any conversation or opportunities, when actually there's always your opportunity to say, let's think about this. Can we do better? Yes, we probably can. That's just the approach. So, yeah.
And I think as white people, we can do better. We must do better every single day. And there's no shame in it. There's no shame in feeling uncomfortable. There's no shame. It's really that we all want the same, well, most of us want the same thing. And it's just always being aware of that and being okay with that.
Agreed.
Another really interesting question that we had in was from a Frolo who couldn't make it to the call last night, but she wanted the call tonight even, but she wanted to know if you could recommend any resources for talking about race with children with learning disabilities. She says her son is 8 and he has Down syndrome. So while he recognizes different skin colors and they've had talks about race at home and privilege, as a family, she feels his understanding is limited, but he has the capacity to understand more about race and racism and understand it in more depth with the right resources. And I think that's a really interesting question, because it's it's about this kind of intersection and ways we can support all kinds of Frolos. Or we've got someone else wanting to join the call. So yeah, it would be great to get your thoughts on that, if you have anything that you could kind of recommend.
Yeah, I mean, forgive me, I just saw the questions just before the call, so but yeah, off the top of my head, I can't think of anything specific. There's a website called The Conscious Kid, which is really, really great. It has tons of materials, talks a lot about race, but it also talks, across children with different abilities, talks about gender, talks about, so, that I would point her to that, because, I'm pretty sure they would have something more, they have tons and tons and tons of material, and they have a really good Instagram page as well to follow. So, but I think also it's an opportunity to, if she's with any networks or organizations or clubs or community groups, or that she goes to, or where she gets support with her son, to start introducing that herself, like to think about, what can we do as a community where we're dealing with children who are already different in that sense. What can we do to introduce more resources talking about race at a deeper level? So that would be my tip.
Thank you.
Yeah, I think, sorry.
No, I was just going to say, were there any books or resources that you've come across through Still I Rise that might be helpful for this Frolo?
I have found that sometimes really gentle learning based on real events and real figures can be really helpful for children with learning disabilities. And then there is the books with representation, so other children that have Down syndrome, and there's a lot of books on that as well that I can share. And I think that's better to focus on that than throwing, like you do was saying, like a whole pile of things, maybe 2 or 3 books that they can check back in with, and where there's gradual learning. I would recommend that. And it's a great question. It really is.
Yeah.
Thanks for that, guys. I think we've got time for sort of maybe one more question. So if I don't think there's any more on the call, so I'll go with one that we had in advance. So you've sort of already answered this question, which was about at what age are children able to understand about race and racism? But there's someone here who wants to know, so she's a solo parent to a mixed race child. She's in touch with her ex's family members. So he does have a network of people who look like him around him, but she'd like to know what else she can do to protect him, support him, nurture his identity, and I guess kind of, again, from that awareness that she doesn't have the same experience as him, and just kind of making sure that she is doing everything that she can as a parent to have those conversations and support him.
Yeah, I think it's, what we've been talking about is just her approach. The fact that she wants to do this and is willing to do this is really the first thing. It's if you're intentional and you're proactive, if she feels able to bring up race and to talk about difference. And I think sometimes maybe in families where there's mixed heritage, sometimes maybe like the mom doesn't want to emphasize difference too much. So it's like, oh, you're my baby, I just want you to be like me, I'm like you, everything's fine. But actually it's better to just acknowledge, you have a different ethnicity from me, and that's absolutely wonderful, and we're still family. There's so many different ways you can be a family. And I think just, again, using resources, using, like books, we keep returning to, but books, TV shows, that kind of thing, and always being open to the questions. And I think just the more you talk about it, the more you normalize it. And when you normalize it, then, that's really the only way you can protect your child. Like, I think as parents, we want to wrap up our kids and cotton wool and make sure nobody and nothing ever gets to them ever. And, unfortunately, we can't do that. What we can do is, step one is really educate ourselves, make sure that we're on top of what we need to be on top of. And step two is just being there, being an actual support for your child, being open so that they can come to you with absolutely anything. I mean, my eldest is 14 now, and he, we still have really good, really long, really deep conversations. A lot of time he's just like banter and nonsense and rubbish, but he still will come to me with like questions and thoughtful stuff that I'm relieved that I've had that relationship with him from very early on. And I think that just comes from being open and not sort of shying away from it. It's the same with I always sort of compare this to like the birds and the bees. Parents again can be like very like, oh, I don't want to talk about sex, let's not bring it up because we're going to protect our children that way. And actually the best way you can protect your child is by being there, being open, being able to have conversations around stuff that is sensitive, and keep learning, sort of see it as like an adventure that you have with him. And also, as Orla was saying, there's so much joy just from being who he is. So really celebrate him, affirm him, if it toys, paintings, you know, all sorts. There's so many things that he can see, you know, find things that can be reflections for who he is in the world. So yeah, that would be my suggestion.
Yeah, and I think as well, kind of leading by example. So we can say everything and you know, have the books in and all the representation and the art and the movies and, you know, the network, but really children learn by example. So I think just applying that every day. I just got a private message there from Wanja about, there was a message at the start of the group just talking about Black voices being amplified. And I just wanted to recognise that because I didn't reply in the chat and she just private messaged me. So yes, absolutely. And I think you'd mentioned as well about hearing from a father with a Black daughter. And we had actually spoken about that at the start, about maybe having the conversation, which would be a really important one to have within the Frolo community. There is an Instagram called MFF, and that's celebrating diverse fatherhood, and that's a really good one to follow online and amplify more Black voices. Like I said, I am talking from my position of white privilege, so thank you, Monja, and sorry for not replying on the chat.
Yeah, that also kind of ties in a question that we've just had here from Donna, which is about, she says, my children are white and I'm trying my best to bring them up to be aware of diversity and be kind. The resources and books focus on teaching diversity, but when and how do I bring in teaching them about their white privilege as a kind of counterpoint, or like something that goes alongside that they have to acknowledge?
Yeah, I would just start having the conversations, even with the resources. If you are aware of white privilege, you know, awareness is key. It's one of those things, it's one of those phrases that used to get people's back up, like, you know, white privilege, I'm not privileged, and all this kind of stuff. But if you're aware of it and you feel like you have a good grip on what white privilege is, you can start talking with your kids from very young. I mean, I write in my book about, let's say, crayons, and the fact that, you know, for kids, so even babies play with crayons, and for many, many years, the flesh crayon was pink. It was like the sort of peachy colored crayon was called flesh. And so for a child who was not that color, you're wondering, okay, am I flesh, or am I, like, what's my color? So you can bring in sort of things like that, like the fact that the assumption by society is that white is normal and everything else is other, everything else has to come with like a prefix or an adjective to describe it. Obviously you don't you don't have to sort of use like teacher lecture language, but, you know, just talk about things like, you know, when you're watching TV, if you've watched a show, it doesn't have to be a show about diversity, but if you've watched a show, it's like, oh, did you notice, you know, all the people in the show were white? You know, why do you think that is? And then have a little conversation about that, you know, see what he thinks. You know, if you read a book about diversity, talk about the fact that, you know, maybe the person who wrote the book was white, even though the book is all about diversity. There's a lot of books, you know, on the resource lists, and maybe the central character is Black, but the author is white, and you're thinking, okay, so, you know, it's wonderful that this is a central Black character, but at the same time, the author is white. So, you know, what are all the various steps that happened for that author to get published over other authors? So there's lots of opportunities all around, and I think it's just you having that awareness and the intention. And at the same time, I think it's important not to, like, I don't go on and on about white privilege in my book, because I feel like sometimes these phrases, you know, people get too hung up on all the phrases and become sort of either buzzwords, or it becomes a bit of a barrier. And I think the important thing is, like, if you can get across the idea that, yes, you know, you as a white boy have a certain advantage in this society, and what you can do with your advantage is do something for others. It's the same as, you know, with any of us. Like, if I have, you know, more money, what can I do to help somebody? If I have more ability, what can I do to help somebody who has less? You know, so yeah, I think use it. Use your power wisely. Recognize what powers you have and use them well.
Well, yeah, I think that was a great answer. Thank you so much. Yeah, thank you both of you for joining us this evening. I think that's been hopefully a really informative session for lots of Frolos. Thank you for answering all those questions from the community. Yeah, thank you for giving up your evenings to come on and have these conversations with us. We really appreciate it.
Thank you
for
so
having
much.
me. Yeah.
Thanks, everyone.
Thank you. Right, I'll share those list of books afterwards as well. All right, thanks everyone.
Thank
Bye.
you. Bye.